Today our gospel is from the 4th chapter of Mark, beginning with the 35th verse. There are 3 little words in this text, not "I love you." There are 3 little words in this text that are important. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and sea obey him?" This is the word of God for the people of God. Three little words. Let us go. You know, there are times in our lives when we have trouble with this whole faith thing because we rate the seen above the unseen, the temporary above the permanent, the partial picture instead of the big picture. We become infected by the secular, mundane things in our lives until a great storm arises in our lives. Then we begin to cry as the disciples did, "We're headed for disaster. Where are you, God? Are you asleep, God?" Great windstorm had arisen while Jesus was asleep in the stern of the boat. And we can picture from the gospel the huge waves pouring over the sides of the boat. When I was making the transition, the total transition from pastoring in the Episcopal Church to pastoring in the United Methodist Church, I thought of this particular gospel reading many, many times. Those 3 little words of Jesus in my heart. And he was saying to me, "Let us go to a new place in my vineyard. Let us go to a new way of doing God's work." "Jesus, I'm so comfortable here. Why do I want to cross the Sea of Galilee?" The words "let us go" were often on Jesus' lips. We don't know what the purpose of of this trip was, but Jesus initiating the trip was part of the pattern of his movement and his restlessness. He was always looking to the next place where someone needed to hear his words or to feel his touch. He used the word peace a lot, and faith in this gospel, meaning trust in God, reliance upon God for help. We hear him at other times saying, your faith has made you whole. And that question that comes to all of his disciples, even today, why are you afraid? Have you no faith? There's a wonderful Rembrandt painting of this particular occurrence in the gospel. What they call the disappearing line in this picture converges on Jesus in this boat. There's a shaft of light from a break in the clouds showing that help comes from God. All else in the picture is chaos and shadow. The frantic helplessness of the disciples. The painting is a true commentary. In 1987, I was in a fishing boat on the Sea of Galilee. It's actually a lake about 600 feet below sea level. A storm came up and we were halfway across, but that was not unusual. The surrounding mountains with the deep valleys act like funnels when wind comes blowing through, and it stirs that lake up into a storm. And in the ancient world, the sea was a chaotic, fearful place, believed to be inhabited by monsters of the deep that could be subdued only by the power of God. The ability of Jesus to control the storm, the raging waters, is a sign of his divine power.
Yeah.
The storm itself symbolizes the forces of chaos and fear in the world and in our lives. The Sea of Galilee is a fit symbol for our lives, with its alternating sunshine and cloud and storms, how suddenly the storms come in sickness, in wars and death, call to a different place that can turn your life upside down, or non-Bible studying folks who welcomed a stranger into their study last Wednesday night. These storms are as unpredictable, as fear-quickening, and as menacing as the storm in the gospel. Our human helplessness is depicted in this gospel. The disciples were in panic, and panic made the threat even worse. Perhaps the function of crisis is to remind us of our essential helplessness. But when our life in sunshine, we can trust our own powers to get us through anything. Beautiful day like today, we can do anything. We got it, Lord. But when our life hits an iceberg, a serious illness comes, or death takes a loved one, we relearn the truth that man is neither able nor was he intended to handle everything from his own resources. Then we ask the ultimate question from John 6, verse 68. To whom can we go? Well, Jesus would have slept through the storm, probably. Tired by the intense effort he exerted, he slept when and where he could, at peace with men and in trust toward God, and trusting the people handling the boat, crossing the lake. Apparently, he could go to sleep anywhere. He was in the stern of the boat where he wouldn't get as wet. Maybe someone put a cushion back there for him. Maybe they didn't. Maybe somebody just gently lifted his head and slid a pillow under his head while he slept. He was immediately master of the storm when the disciples awoke him. My favorite author, Frederick Buechner, in his book, Peculiar Treasures, says this: it was the wind rather than the disciples that Jesus seems to have spoken to first as soon as he'd gotten his eyes open. He rebuked it, Mark says in verse 38. Cut that out, wind. You can almost picture him staring it down, with the hair lashing his face as he holds on to the gunnels to keep from being blown overboard. He was gentler with the sea. Take it easy, he said. Quiet down. When it came to the disciples' turns, he said, why did you panic? And what kind of faith do you call that? They were so impressed to find that the wind had stopped blowing and the sea had flattened out again, they didn't get around to even answering him. His stifling the storm was not the miracle. Jesus broke through their fears and convinced them of the power and presence of God. That was the miracle in this story. Those three little words of Christ, let us go, are powerful and penetrating words for us as individual disciples and as a church. Have we kept the horizon in view that Jesus had before him at all times? Do those three little words still sound commandingly in our hearts and minds, or has a paralysis of inertia or fear set in? Have we become an established church? The whole kit and caboodle, not just Louisa Chapel. Have we become an established church, or a settled routine ministry wherever we are? The call of the unreached, the untouched, the oppressed, the ones who need to know the miracle of knowing the power and presence of God in their lives, was always with Jesus. We need to answer the call of Christ to go across new frontiers, to try new things, to leave the comfort at looking at an almost full church on Sunday morning as an outward sign of success that becomes the bread of life to all. The disciples cried out, "Do you not care if we perish? Are you asleep, God?" God doesn't share our panic. Like a father, he loves and pities his children and will help them, but he is not as frightened as they are. Men turn to war because they're terrified and insist that God turn to war, and we can call it a holy war. We can see indications of the mode of panic in every crisis between nations. We do well to be frightened. But instead of pushing to communicate our panic to God, we should allow Him to communicate His calm to us. But how can we do that? Let me tell you about 3 people. A harried mother, a busy executive, and an overwhelmed teenager. Every afternoon, after putting her daughter down for a nap, she drags a chair into the backyard and she sits. Just sits. Sometimes she enjoys watching a squirrel or a chipmunk, or maybe a butterfly hovering over her garden, or loses herself in the clouds overhead. After an hour or so, she returns to the diapers and the toys and the storybooks to find her little one ready to charge through the afternoon. And thanks to her few moments of precious stillness, Mom is recharged as well. The morning is filled with phone calls and meetings. Like most managers, motivating, fixing, adapting, admonishing, and completing are his business. On rare days when he can escape at lunch, he picks up a sandwich and finds a quiet place in the park or the library. He loses himself in a chapter from Thomas Merton or Henry Nouwen, or soaks in every word, every image from one of the Psalms. Sales figures and bottom lines might define him as a professional. But it is in such moments of stillness that define him as a human being. Like most teenagers, his life is filled with confusion and questions, discoveries and realizations, moodiness and angst. Sometimes the roller coaster of being 16 is just overwhelming. So he closes the door, lies on his bed, and puts on his headphones. The music is not the usual music that makes his parents' heads spin and their eyes roll. It's a wordless CD of soft jazz or classical guitar that quiets the nerves and soothes the spirit. In music he wouldn't dare to admit to his friends that he even listens to. The teenager finds a sanctuary of stillness. The words that Jesus addresses to the storm on the Sea of Galilee can just as well be addressed to us. Peace. Quiet. Be still. In our stormy whirlwind, sometimes fearful lives, we need to make time for peace and stillness in order to hear the voice of Jesus when he says, "Let us go." To reset our compasses as we navigate our small boats through the stormy seas of life, to check our bearings, to make sure that we are living our lives in the hope and joy in which God created us to live them. Like the harried mother, the busy executive, the overwhelmed teenager, the panicked disciples, and our Lord Himself, we need moments of silence to reevaluate our lives so that we may realize that our lives are really held in control of God, the giver of life, the author of love, the Father of all that is good, not evil. Where are you, God? The next time you celebrate the Eucharist here, remember this. Christ's gift of the Eucharist, the bread and wine, become the covenant meal, sealing our relationship with a God who gives everything He has for us to be the people He calls to Himself. The Eucharist we celebrate contains the limitless love of His Son, our Christ, who suffered, died, and rose for us. Christ asked us to find our joy, as St. Augustine said, in becoming what we receive during the Eucharist. To become Eucharist to one another. To make the love of God real for all. Where are you, God? God says, I am with you, and you, and you, and you, and you, and all of you. Let us go together in peace. Amen. Verse 66. you ushers come forward? Heavenly Father, as we return our gifts to you, may we always keep in our mind as we give that these gifts will be used to spread your word, to bring comfort and healing to others, to make your word known not just in Louisa Chapel or Franklin, but throughout this whole world. We give to return to the Creator that we may help create believers here. Amen.
Three